In this video, I'm going to be ranking the 10 best quarterbacks in NFL history who didn't make a Super Bowl. Let's begin, shall we? Number 10, Carson Palmer. Palmer was the number 1 overall pick in 2003 after winning the Heisman Trophy at USC. He didn't play a single snap in what would have been his real rookie season, but when he finally did hit the field, he was a very good to good quarterback for the Bengals. His best season in Cincinnati came in 2005 when he threw for 32 touchdowns and looked to be on his way to superstardom, but as we all know, he suffered a torn leg in the playoffs that year, which seemed to set his progress and the Bengals' progress back. All in all, Palmer made the playoffs just 2 times with the Bengals and losing both of those contests. He then migrated to the Raiders for a couple years to go back to Southern California, and again, he never made the playoffs. His best success by far came with the Arizona Cardinals late in his career, specifically in the 2015 season, where he was probably the best quarterback in the league in terms of the eye test, and he also had monster numbers. It also should be noted that Carson had a massive shoulder injury in 2008, which really probably affected him more than his torn ACL did in 2005. But regardless, Palmer had his one shining moment in 2015, aforementioned, in the divisional playoff round versus the Packers when he beat them on a Larry Fitzgerald shovel pass before getting his ass kicked and committing a shitload of turnovers, including 4 interceptions in the NFC Championship game against the Panthers. Palmer would retire just 2 years later after the 2017 season, ending his career with just 1 playoff win, but he did throw for over 46,000 yards and nearly 300 touchdowns, so his career was worthy of a first overall pick, if not somewhat meh. Number 9, Kirk Cousins. That's right, the Kirkster makes an appearance on this list. Kirk is one of those good stat, bad records guys, or whatever you want to call him. Originally, he came into the league, he was supposed to be the backup plan for the Washington Redskins at the time for RG3, Robert Griffin III, and when he was drafted, everyone said, why are you drafting another quarterback? Well, it turns out that Cousins would have a much better career than RG3, spanning several teams. He was with Washington until the 2017 season, putting up great numbers, but playoff success eluded him. He made the playoffs 1 time as Washington's starter in 2015, but they lost to the Green Bay Packers. Now, Cousins would continue to put up great numbers, and he would also become one of the most prized free agents in recent memory, signing with the Minnesota Vikings fresh off of a 13-3 season in 2017. People thought this would finally be the time for Cousins to establish himself as a truly elite quarterback and get to a Super Bowl, but that did not happen. He played 6 years in Minnesota, continuing to put up good stats, but he only made the playoffs 2 times in those 6 seasons and only won 1 playoff game, which was a wild card game, so he never even made a conference championship game. After tearing his Achilles in 2023, the Vikings finally had enough and they moved on, where he went to Atlanta, and now his future is kind of undecided after he was benched for first-round pick Michael Penix. Cousins, compared to his draft status, has had a very successful career and is actually the all-time postseason leader in interception percentage, for what it's worth, but he has just a 1-3 career playoff record, which offsets his almost 43,000 career yards and nearly 300 career touchdown passes. Very, very similar career to Carson Palmer, just very, very different in terms of how they were drafted. Number 8, Dak Prescott. That's right, I am including ACT players on this list who are still in their prime. Now, Prescott, much like a couple other players ahead of him on this list, and I guess technically Kirk Cousins, but Kirk Cousins is probably done playing, or at the very least, he's not going to end up ever reaching a Super Bowl. Prescott still has time to get to a Super Bowl with the Cowboys, but again, this is the Cowboys and Prescott, and honestly, it's been the same thing since 2016 when Prescott shot onto the scene, replacing Tony Romo, more on him later, spoiler, and had one of the best rookie seasons of all time. However, his best chance, ironically, to make a Super Bowl was probably that rookie season, but then they got upset at home by Aaron Rodgers and the Packers in the divisional round. Since that magical rookie season, it's been a up and down roller coaster for the Cowboys. They've had success in the regular season, but they've also missed the playoffs sometimes, while Dak, for the most part, has put up great numbers, as you would expect for a quarterback on this video. And his playoff numbers are also somewhat respectable, although they kind of belie the fact that he still has not just never made a Super Bowl, he's never made a conference championship game in almost a decade as a starter. He's made the divisional round 3 times, losing in 2016, 2018, and in 2022. His most recent playoff game was an embarrassing home playoff loss to the Green Bay Packers in a season where the Cowboys were a dominant team at home. It just seems like no matter what numbers Dak puts up, or no matter how many regular season games the Cowboys win, we're just not going to see them in the Super Bowl as long as this guy is in charge. And who knows, he might be a Hall of Famer someday if he's able to actually have some team success in the postseason, but I would doubt it. He still has a lot of work to do. But still, he gets on this list because when healthy, he is a consistently above average performer. Number 7, Randall Cunningham. Randall Cunningham, as you might have heard, was a bit ahead of his time. He was an athletic freak with a huge arm and incredibly mobile, and he was also tall. But the guy liked to take sacks. A lot. So many sacks that one season in 1986 in particular, he he was sacked on over 1/4 of his dropbacks, which is just, I don't even know how to say that without laughing. However, despite his penchant for sacks, he was still an incredibly successful quarterback for the Philadelphia Eagles, most notably in the regular season. However, his best season of his career came late in his career at the age of 35 after a year in retirement and a year coming off the bench with the Vikings in 1998, aided by the help of rookie superstar wide receiver Randy Moss with Chris Carter, Jake Reed, and Robert Smith in the backfield. Cunningham kind of stumbled into a quarterback's dream and had an all-pro season, finishing second in MVP voting. That was a 35-year-old Cunningham. Now, if he had had that type of support from the beginning of his career, he probably would have been the best quarterback of all time. Who knows? But as it stands, Cunningham was a bit of an up-and-down postseason performer, especially with the Eagles. Despite a massive amount of talent on those late 80s, early 90s Eagles teams, Chris Carter, Keith Byers, Reggie White, Jerome Brown, Clyde Simmons, I keep going on and on, Keith Jackson, the Eagles won just one playoff game under Randall Cunningham's watch. His postseason performances did get better with the Vikings, and his best shot to get to a Super Bowl clearly was in 1998 when he hosted the NFC Championship game versus the Atlanta Falcons. And as you all know, the Vikings had a late lead, 27-20, and had a field goal with a chance to go up 10, but it didn't work out. However, the Vikings had other chances to close the game, could not get the deal done, and ended up losing the game. And shortly afterwards, Randall Cunningham fell off of a cliff very quickly and was benched the next season for Jeff George. Still, he's one of the best running quarterbacks of all time. He threw for nearly 30,000 yards and over 200 touchdown passes. He was a 2-time All-Pro and a 3-time MVP runner-up. He's not just one of the best quarterbacks who never made a Super Bowl, he's also one of the best quarterbacks who's not in the Hall of Fame. Had he been able to get to a Super Bowl and win one, I think he would be in Canton right now. But alas, he's not. Number 6, Tony Romo. I've mentioned this before, but I do find it hilarious that the Cowboys have had 2 consecutive quarterbacks who have greatly outproduced their draft position. In Romo's case, he wasn't even drafted at all, and in Dak Prescott's case, he was a 4th-round pick. So they've stumbled into 2 franchise quarterbacks over the last 20 years or so, and they still can't even make a conference championship game. What a tough scene. Anyway, Tony Romo, you know the deal by now. Romo was the Dak. For Dak, he had great stats, but playoff success eluded him. He also had some famous individual playoff moments that weren't so great, such as fumbling the would-be snap versus Seattle in his first ever playoff game, which cost the Cowboys the win. Romo, much like his successor Dak Prescott, would make the divisional round 3 times, in 2009 versus the Vikings, in 2014 versus Green Bay, and most notably in 2007 versus the Giants when the Cowboys had the 1 seed but ended up blowing it. In 2009 versus Vikings, they ended up getting blown out by 31 points, and in 2014 it was the famous Dez didn't catch it, which was by far the greatest chance Romo had getting to a Super Bowl. But still, even if the Cowboys had won that game, as we know, they would not have been guaranteed a spot in the Super Bowl. But it would have sounded nicer for Romo's resume and his career, which had over 34,000 passing yards and 248 touchdowns and very, very good efficiency metrics, to say that he did make a conference championship game. It's ironic, his career numbers and efficiency are very much identical to Steve Young, who's a first-ballot Hall of Famer and one of the best quarterbacks of all time. But guess what? Steve Young won a Super Bowl and threw 6 touchdown passes in that Super Bowl win. So playoff success when it comes to the Hall of Fame does seem to be an important quality no matter what people say. Number 5, Dan Fouts. Fouts, who is probably most known for his cameo in The Waterboy, which greatest movie of all time, was actually a pretty good quarterback in his own day, and he also loved having a beard. I mean, my God, this guy has had the same beard for the last 50 years. He also loved the ladies and also getting into fights at hotels, but that's neither here nor there. Fouts was literally Phillip Rivers before Phillip Rivers, which is ironic because they both played for the same organization. Fouts was a devil-may-care type quarterback. He threw a lot of interceptions, but he also threw a lot of touchdown passes and had a lot of very exciting offenses, which are famous as the Air Coryell offenses. But they're also famous because they never made a Super Bowl. Fouts would end up spending 15 years in San Diego with the Chargers, but Chargers made the playoffs only 4 times, which was 4 years in a row from 1979 to 1982. That was their title window. Fouts and the Chargers made the conference championship game in back-to-back years in 1980 and in 1981. Their best chance to get to a Super Bowl was in 1980, but they were upset in the conference championship game by the wildcard Oakland Raiders. The next year, after the famous game in Miami, which they won, they had to go to Cincinnati and Riverfront Stadium, and it was about like negative 40 degrees, and their offense was completely negated. They ended up getting blown out and losing. In 1982, Fouts was first-team All-Pro and MVP runner-up and Offensive Player of the Year, but the Chargers went one and done in the playoffs, and after that, that was basically it. He led the league in passing yards 4 straight years. He led the league in touchdown passes twice. He led the league in passing yards per game an incredible 6 times. He led the league in net yards per attempt 6 times and adjusted net yards per attempt twice. He was 2-time first-team All-Pro. He never did win an MVP, but it is ironic to me that in 7 career playoff games in a 3-4 record. His first career playoff game, he threw 5 picks, and his last career playoff game, he also threw 5 interceptions. His career touchdown-interception ratio will not make anybody impressed, but still, this guy was one of the best quarterbacks of his era and all time once you adjust the numbers. You just never get to the Super Bowl. Number 4, Warren Moon. Warren Moon and Dan Fouts' careers were somewhat similar in that they both put up amazing raw stats and had a couple seasons of great efficiency, but they never could get their teams to a Super Bowl. As you all know the story of Warren Moon by now, he started late in the NFL because people were racist and didn't think that a black quarterback could succeed at the NFL level, despite Warren Moon having a dominant CFL career and a successful career at the University of Washington. However, Moon's early career, his first couple seasons, much like Fouts's, were not very successful. It wasn't until 1988, at the age of 32, that he had his first Pro Bowl season, finishing 5th in MVP voting. Moon's best season came in 1990 when he threw 33 touchdown passes and was the Offensive Player of the Year, as well as 3rd in MVP voting. However, he missed the playoffs that year not because of team record, but because of an injury. However, those Houston Oilers teams that he played on, starting in 1987, made the playoffs 7 consecutive years from 87 to 1993, but they could just never get over the hump into the conference championship game. In 1987, they beat Seattle just to get blown out by Denver. In 1988, they beat Cleveland in an amazing wildcard game just to lose to Buffalo. In 1989, they lost a close one to Pittsburgh in the wildcard round. In 1990, they got blown out by the Bengals, which was the game that Warren Moon missed. In 91, they came oh so excruciatingly close to making it championship game. They had a late lead versus the Broncos before John Elway did the drive 2.0. 1992 is the most famous loss, which was when they blew a 32-point lead to the Buffalo Bills in the wild card round. And then 93, which was just a shit show of a year for everybody involved. They ended up losing at home in the divisional round after going 12-4 to Joe Montana and the Kansas City Chiefs. Moon would make the playoffs one more time with Minnesota the next season in 94, but he went one and done. Overall, his career playoff record was 3-7, and his playoff stats were pretty much identical to his regular season numbers, so it wasn't a case of him falling off of a cliff from the regular season to the postseason. He just had some bad luck, but he also had some front-loaded playoff games, meaning that he had a lot of success in the first half of games, but the Oilers offense kind of sputter out in the second half. Most notably, we saw this versus Buffalo in 92. But overall, Warren Moon, despite not starting until the age of 28 in the NFL, threw for 49,000 yards, 291 touchdown passes, and made the Pro Bowl 9 times. So yes, despite never even making a conference championship game, Moon does belong on this list. Where he belongs on this list, that's up to you. For me, he lands at number 4. Number 3, Philip Rivers. Oh, good old Philip Rivers. He was drafted 4th overall by the New York Giants of all teams, and then he was eventually traded for Eli Manning, and he spent all of his career, or very much all of his career, with the San Diego Chargers before finishing with 1 year in Indianapolis. He spent his first 2 seasons of his career on the bench behind Drew Brees. Then once he became the starter in 06, the Chargers became one of the elite teams in the league, and this was when Rivers really had his best opportunities to get to a Super Bowl, most notably in his first year as a starter in 2006 when the team went 14-2, but they ended up losing to the Patriots. At this point in time, through 2009, which also happened to be 4th straight year that the Chargers made the playoffs to begin Rivers' career, Rivers had Hall of Fame GOAT type numbers and looked as though he was going to be a no-doubt Hall of Famer, but playoff success eluded him. He missed the playoffs 3 straight years from 2010 to 2012 while his numbers declined. Then he bounced back in 2013 to get back to the playoffs before missing the playoffs for 4 straight years again until 2018, where his numbers once again bounced back with a great season. He spent 1 more year in LA in 2019, going 5-11, before spending his last year in Indianapolis, making the playoffs 1 more time for 1 last gasp at a chance for a ring, and he ended up going 1 and done versus the Josh Allen Bills. Now, his best chance, as I alluded to, came in 2006 in terms of talent-wise, because the Chargers had the number 1 seed and home field advantage throughout the entire AFC that year, just to lose to the Patriots. But his actual best opportunity to get to a Super Bowl was in 2007 when he made the conference championship game for the only time in his career, and he did it on a torn ACL against the undefeated Patriots, and he probably, or he might have won if he had not been injured. It's ironic, a guy who didn't miss a game for 15 straight years somehow is the most injured he ever was against Tom Brady's team. Isn't that just ironic that Tom Brady would benefit from something like that? Anyway, Chargers lost that game, and they would never make it back to an AFC championship game. In fact, after his first 4 years, as I alluded to, Rivers' record as a starter was a stellar 46-18 with 4 straight playoff appearances, but after that, from 2010 to 2020, the last 11 seasons of his career, Philip Rivers was a 500 quarterback, going 88-88 and making the playoffs just 3 times. He never won an MVP, he never won Offensive Player of the Year. In fact, his only individual award was the AP Comeback Player of the Year in 2013, which he won because he was so bad in 2012 that they gave it to him for not sucking as much, which is always hilarious. But anyway, you don't want to talk about sucking in Philip Rivers. This guy, off-field, we all know what he does off-field. We all know how he moves off-field. And although he might have been a terrible clutch quarterback quarterback and he didn't make any Super Bowls and his team's underachieved, it's hard to look at his numbers and not say wow. He threw for over 63,000 yards. He threw for 421 touchdown passes with a career passer rating of 95.2 and elite efficiency metrics. However, his numbers in the playoffs did decrease. He ended his career in 12 playoff games with a disappointing 5-7 record. Number 2, Lamar Jackson. Yes, that's right. If you can guess who number 2 is, you probably know who number 1 is, but I'm not going to spoil it. I'm going to make you wait and see. Lamar has been somewhat of a controversial quarterback for all of, really, I don't know, no reason since he came into the league. People have always wondered, oh, can he be a passer and blah, 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 blah. Well, by year 2, he was the MVP, and then he had a couple years where he was hurt and wasn't great, and then he won MVP again in 2023, albeit in a non-dominant season, for having what was the best season of his career in 2024, as you all know, throwing 41 touchdown passes to just 4 interceptions, along with running for over 900 yards. He was named first team All-Pro, but he didn't win MVP, which doesn't make any sense. He's led the league in yards per attempt rushing 4 different times. He led the league in passer rating this year. He led the league in basically every passing stat this year. He's led the league in QBR twice. He led the league in touchdown passes in 2019. And his teams have been unbelievably successful so far with him in the regular season, having a stellar 70-24 regular season record. And he's made the playoffs every single year he's been healthy as the starter. And that's where the problems are, as you all know. And despite his best postseason so far, by far being this most recent postseason in 2024, he was still not able to get his team to a Super Bowl. In fact, he was not able to get his team to the conference championship game, although Mark Andrews might have helped out with that. And this is really the first year where Lamar really didn't have any blame. But that still doesn't mean he hasn't wasted a few good opportunities, most notably in 2019 and in 2023. In 2019, with the number 1 seed throughout the AFC, the Ravens completely crapped their pants versus the Titans in the divisional round. They were on the brink of potentially going to the conference championship game in 2020 when Lamar threw a back-breaking interception versus the Bills. By far, their best chance to get to a Super Bowl and potentially win a Super Bowl was in 2023 when they had the AFC championship game at home and Lamar had a very uneven performance, which led to the Chiefs winning 17-10. It's the only time so far in Lamar's career where him and Patrick Mahomes have matched up head-to-head. Lamar is only 28 years old, and if you look at his career resume so far, 4 Pro Bowls, 3 first-team All-Pros, 2 MVPs, and his amazing regular season record, this guy is going to be first-ballot Hall of Fame quarterback. And again, only 28. He just turned 28, so it's amazing. He's an amazing football player, but he still hasn't had that breakthrough postseason where he's been able to get his team to the Super Bowl and win a championship. Now, of course, this disclaimer always must be said. He still is young, like I said, and he can still change history, but as of this moment in time, he's the second best quarterback, in my opinion, in NFL history to never make a Super Bowl in the Super Bowl era. And that only leaves one person who you could have guessed. That's right. Number 1 is Josh Allen. Much like Lamar Jackson coming out of Wyoming in 2018, Josh Allen had a lot of questions about whether or not he could be an NFL caliber quarterback, and to start, it really didn't look like he was going to be much of anything. Even as a rookie, he threw more interceptions than touchdowns, and his sophomore season was littered with inconsistency and a terrible completion percentage. But then, in year 3, the moment Tom Brady left the AFC East, Josh Allen transformed into an MVP caliber quarterback. And ever since 2020 specifically, the Bills have been one of the best teams in the league, winning 13 games 3 different times in that span and making the playoffs in each of the last 6 seasons. Now, as you already know, Josh Allen to this date has still never been a first-team All-Pro, but he does have an MVP because I don't really know how that works. He's made 3 Pro Bowls. In a way, it's kind of fitting because the last quarterback to win AP MVP and not be named first-team All-Pro in the same season was John Elway back in 1987. And if you ask people who does Josh Allen remind you of, I guess it could be John Elway, a big, strapping quarterback with a strong arm, who can also scramble, and that's what Josh Allen does. Josh Allen, for his career thus far, has over 26,000 passing yards, 195 touchdowns. His passing stats on their own are not necessarily Hall of Fame caliber, but once you combine them with his 65 career rushing touchdowns and over 4,000 rushing yards, it really shows you just how good he is. He's almost as good as Jalen Hurts. But really, the reason why Josh Allen is number 1 on this list, despite not having the counting stats yet of some of the other players on this list, is because of his playoff career. Josh Allen has started the most playoff games of any quarterback in NFL history to never make a Super Bowl at 13, and he's only 28 years old. But this isn't a case of somebody getting to the playoffs and crapping their pants. Josh Allen has some of the best playoff numbers in postseason history and one of the best playoff seasons ever in 2021, which didn't even result in a conference championship game appearance because of the famous 13 seconds game. What I'm trying to say is, if you're a guy who's completed 66% of your passes in the playoffs, 13 games, has 25 touchdown passes to 4 interceptions with a 101.7 passer rating and a 7.1 adjusted net yards per attempt, all in the postseason, and you're consistently on a team that's in the postseason, on a dominant team, chances are, if you haven't even won a Super Bowl, you've likely at least been to a Super Bowl, and that has not happened yet for Josh Allen, and that's mostly because of a guy named Patrick Patrick Mahomes in Kansas City, who has been the bane of Josh Allen's existence, as Allen and the Bills have gone 0-4 against Mahomes thus far in his playoff career. In addition to his passing numbers in the postseason, he has an incredible running stat sheet as well, rushing for over 650 yards and 7 touchdowns in the postseason. And again, this guy has not even made a Super Bowl yet, which is incredible. He really is about 3 or 4 plays away from potentially being in 3 or 4 Super Bowls. That's how unfair the league can be. But again, much like Lamar Jackson, he still is young, he's in his prime, he just married a smoke show, so he has a chance, and many chances still ahead, potentially get back to the Super Bowl. But thus far, there's no debate in my mind, especially considering how the quarterbacks have actually performed in the postseason. Josh Allen is the best quarterback to not make a Super Bowl at this point in time, but my gut tells me that he eventually will. That's why I'm making this video now, because as of this point, he still qualifies and has never made a Super Bowl.